Part 1 expanded to approximately 700 words. The first hint of dawn spilled over the desert like a thin line of fire, turning the sands golden red as if the earth itself bled light. Caleb Rourke guided his horse through the silent canyon, jaw tight, eyes burning with exhaustion. He had ridden all night, hard, fast, reckless, following the faint traces of hoofprints and dragged footprints he'd spotted near an abandoned well the evening before. Tracks that told a grim story without a single word. When a woman was taken in the desert, the sun wasn't her worst enemy. Men were. Caleb knew that truth too well. A vulture circled overhead in slow, lazy loops, as if waiting for something to die. The sight made his stomach knot. He whispered to his horse, "Easy, girl. We're close." As he nudged her forward, the canyon walls rose higher, narrowing into a throat of stone. The echoes of his horse's steps bounced in eerie repetition. Somewhere ahead, faint as a ghost sigh, he heard the flicker crackle of a dying campfire. The smell of smoke drifted on the cold morning air, thin, acrid, and wrong. He slowed. The renegades he trailed weren't ordinary outlaws. They were scavengers of war, men with no allegiance, no home, no conscience. They preyed on anyone traveling alone, settlers, scouts, Apache women taken during raids. They didn't care whose enemy they were, only whose pockets were full. Caleb had seen the aftermath of their handiwork more than once. He'd buried enough bodies in shallow desert graves to know exactly what fate awaited a woman in their hands. That was why he didn't hesitate now. Didn't question whether riding through the night was madness. Didn't wonder why he, a drifting cowboy with no one waiting for him anywhere, cared enough to risk his life for a stranger. He simply rode. When he spotted the camp, he dismounted silently and tied his horse behind a boulder. The renegades slept on their backs, mouths open, whiskey bottles lying in the sand like spent cartridges. Their snoring mixed with the hiss of the wind. The fire had collapsed into glowing red coals. But Caleb's attention snapped instantly to the figure chained to the wagon wheel. The young Apache woman sat perfectly upright despite the crude iron cuffs digging into her wrists. Her long black hair fell in tangled ropes around her shoulders, dusted with sand. Her face was fierce, sculpted by pride rather than fear. Eyes as dark as obsidian flicked toward Caleb the moment he stepped into view. Even in captivity, she looked like a warrior. Her gaze wasn't pleading, it was judging. Measuring him, deciding whether he was another monster come to carve more scars into her life. Caleb lifted a finger to his lips, signaling silence. She didn't nod, didn't blink, but she didn't cry out either. The first man died without waking. Caleb's knife slid across his throat in one clean, practiced motion. The second stirred, mumbling, rolling onto his side. Caleb struck the base of his skull with the hilt, knocking him out cold. But the third, a burly brute with a wolf tattoo across his chest, snorted awake just as Caleb stepped toward the woman. His hand shot for his pistol. Caleb lunged, slamming his boot into the man's jaw. The impact sent him sprawling backward, teeth flying into the sand. Before he could recover, Caleb hit him again, tying his wrists and gagging him with a strip of cloth ripped from his own shirt. All three were secured within seconds. Only then did Caleb kneel beside the young woman. She tensed. He kept his voice low, gentle, the way he spoke to spooked horses and wounded men. "I'm here to cut your chains. You'll be free in a minute." Her chin lifted a fraction, regal even in misery. "You don't know me, cowboy," she said in accented but steady English. "My people call me Nasha. I'd rather die than be yours." For a moment, Caleb simply stared at her, stunned not by the words, but by the fire behind them. She wasn't begging, bargaining, or breaking. She was warning him. Part 2 expanded to approximately 700 words. Nasha didn't thank him when the chains fell. She didn't even look relieved. Instead, she rose slowly, like a wounded animal refusing to show pain, her spine straight, her expression carved from stone. Caleb had seen plenty of tough men, but none of them had looked half as proud while standing barefoot in the cold sand with wrists rubbed raw and bloodied. She took one step forward. Then another. On the third step her knees wavered, and she fell hard onto one knee. Caleb instinctively reached for her, but she slashed her hand up in warning, eyes blazing like lightning in a desert storm. I don't belong to you, she said again, her voice rough from thirst yet firm with conviction. Caleb raised his hands in surrender. I know, and I'm not asking you to. She struggled back to her feet, trembling but refusing to lean on anything that looked like mercy. Watching her fight just to stand made something twist in Caleb's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Admiration, respect, or maybe anger at a world cruel enough to break a woman like her and still expect her to keep walking. He reached into his saddlebag and tossed a canteen at her feet, stepping back. You can keep walking without me, he said, but you won't get far without water. Nasha stared at the canteen as if it were a snake coiled and ready to strike. For several long seconds she didn't move. The canyon wind swept around them, carrying dust across her legs, tugging at her hair. Caleb didn't rush her. Finally, kneeling with a wince she tried to hide, she picked it up and took a long drink. A shudder ran through her body. When she looked at him over the rim of the canteen, something in her gaze had shifted, not trust, not even acceptance, but a sliver of recognition. The acknowledgement that he had offered her something real without demanding anything in return. We have to move, she said quietly. Caleb nodded and walked to retrieve his horse, but she turned sharply, eyes flashing. I walk, she insisted. I don't ride with strangers. He almost argued, then caught himself. All right, but you set the pace. She began walking with a determined, uneven gait. Caleb followed several yards behind, giving her space and showing he meant what he said. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. By mid-morning, the canyon turned into an oven. Heat rose from the ground in shimmering waves, warping the world into a mirage of shifting colors. Twice she stumbled. Twice she caught herself before he could help. The third time, she swayed so badly he thought she'd fall again, but she clenched her jaw and forced herself upright. Pride, he realized, was the only thing she had left, and she guarded it like sacred ground. As they reached flatter terrain, the horizon spread wide before them. Sagebrush dotted the desert like scattered islands. Far off, mountains bled blue into the sky. Around noon they found shade under a rocky outcrop. Nasha collapsed, not dramatically, not desperately, just with the exhaustion of someone who had pushed far beyond what her body should endure. Caleb sat a respectful distance away and pulled out some jerky. He tossed a small piece to her. She didn't take it at first. Her eyes narrowed. You could have killed me, she said. Could have, he agreed, chewing slowly. You could have left me. Could have. And yet you stayed. He shrugged lightly. Didn't feel right leaving you behind. She studied him with the sharpness of a hunter tracking wounded prey. Why? You don't know me. You don't know my tribe. You don't know if my people would welcome you or strike you down. Doesn't matter, he said. Saw a woman in chains. That was enough. Her expression tightened, as if the simplicity of his answer irritated her more than anything. People who had suffered often distrusted anything that came too easily. Especially kindness. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by their breaths and the distant call of a hawk. She finally took the jerky, sniffed it, and ate cautiously. My tribe was attacked 2 nights ago, she said suddenly, voice low. I escaped in the dark. They chased me. My brother stayed behind to slow them down. Caleb waited. They killed him. Her voice cracked on the last word, just a crack, but it cut deeper than any scream. Part 3 expanded to approximately 700 words. Night in the desert came fast, draping the canyon in a blanket of darkness stitched with stars. The air turned brittle and cold, and the wind whispered through the rock formations, carrying the smell of sage and distant pine. Caleb built a small fire, careful to keep it low so it wouldn't draw attention. Sparks danced upward, vanishing into the sky like tiny shooting stars, while shadows flickered across the canyon walls. Nasha sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the flames. The silence between them was thick but no longer tense. It had the weight of 2 survivors sharing a temporary truce with the world. She finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured, as though testing whether words could be trusted. You fought like someone who's seen too much death, she said. Caleb shifted, letting the warmth of the fire touch his face. War, it teaches a man what's worth killing for. And what's worth protecting, he said, eyes tracing the jagged shadows of the canyon walls. I've killed enough to know there's nothing worth losing someone to, if you can help it. Nasha studied him. The firelight glinted in her dark eyes, revealing a faint softness beneath her unyielding exterior. She remembered every cruel thing men had done to her people, every betrayal carved into her memory, yet here sat a man who had risked his life for hers and demanded nothing in return. It was a foreign concept, almost unbelievable, and yet it was real. What tribe were you born to? She asked suddenly, breaking the silence further. Caleb chuckled softly, a dry, tired sound. The tribe of whoever hires a drifter. My folks, they're long gone. I've been living on horseback ever since. No roots, no home, just the horizon. She nodded, absorbing his words, and for a moment, the desert around them seemed less hostile. Pain recognized pain, and loss recognized loss. The quiet bond they shared that night was unspoken, formed not from kindness but from survival. In my tribe, she whispered, almost to herself, we believe every person carries two wolves inside them. One is honor, one is cruelty. Most men I've met let the cruel wolf rule. And yours? Caleb asked, curiosity softening the edges of his voice. Nasha studied him long and hard. Then, finally, she said, yours is still fighting. And that makes it dangerous. He smiled faintly, tipping his hat toward the firelight. Dangerous how? Because, she hesitated, a single breath catching in her throat. Because now, I have a choice. I can walk free, but I'll remember you. That's dangerous in its own way. Caleb didn't argue. There were no promises to make, no bonds to forge tonight. The desert had taught him that freedom was fragile, and he had just spent the day giving it back to someone who deserved it. The respect in her eyes was reward enough. The next morning, the horizon stretched wide with promise. Nasha's homeland came into view, verdant valleys, streams cutting silver through the green, smoke curling gently from distant lodges. The sight brought tears to her eyes, though she blinked them away before they could fall. You made it, Caleb said softly. We made it, she corrected. As they approached, two Apache scouts emerged from the treeline, bows drawn. Nasha stepped forward, lifting her hands high, and called out in her native tongue. Their bows lowered instantly. One of them, a tall man with weathered features, dismounted and embraced her, murmuring a prayer of thanks to the spirits. Caleb hung back, knowing his work here was done. He hadn't come to join her world, only to return her safely to it. Yet, as he turned to leave, Nasha's voice stopped him. Wait. She walked to him, each step measured, eyes unwavering. She reached out, placing a hand lightly on his chest. Her touch was soft but fierce, commanding attention. I said I'd rather die than be yours, she reminded him. Her eyes held the same fire from dawn, the same unbroken pride, but now there was a hint of something more, acknowledgement, gratitude, and perhaps the beginning of trust. Because men who help only to take are worse than chains. Caleb nodded, understanding her truth. He didn't speak. Words would only dilute what she was trying to convey. But you, her voice softened to a whisper, barely carrying over the breeze. You cut my chains and asked for nothing. That makes you dangerous in a different way. Because now I choose to walk free, and I also choose to remember you. Caleb's heart clenched in a way it hadn't for years, a strange warmth spreading through him. He tipped his hat in silent acknowledgement.